Hi Bible journalers, I'm back with more on watercolor, and these were lessons that were presented at the March Vacaville Bible Art Journaling Collaborative meeting, and so I wanted to share it for those of you who weren't able to be there. I wanted to tell you a secret first and foremost about watercolor purists, and that's that watercolor artists most likely would not use watercolor in their Bibles just because watercolor purists really believe, and I understand why, that the paper that you do watercolor on is the most important piece, and then pigment is the second most important thing. I love watercolor in my Bible, even though the paper is not the best for watercoloring. We can make it work if we just know how watercolor works and we handle it accordingly. And I love watercolor because of the fact that it can be very detailed and it can be very abstract. And so it's a fun way for beginning painters to sort of get in and try some very abstract flowers, let the paint kind of flow and move, and it has a life of its own, which is really fun to see. So I'm starting out with this first of a few different lessons talking about brush exercise that you can do to get familiar with your brushes. And I have my set of brushes that I use the most here. I have a flat wash brush. I have a smaller angled brush and an even smaller flat brush. And I have a couple smaller round brushes, which are the most versatile of watercolor brushes. So what I had everyone do in the class is take the brushes they have, and I just had them pick a color and then try to make as many different marks with their brush as they can. So I have my flat wash brush, and I can do a line with it, or maybe I can do a square with it. What happens when I go sideways? I can do short little lines like this. So you just kind of press it on there and let the bristles fan out a little bit, and it almost creates a little tulip just by pushing down on this one brush with paint in it. Let's see, what else could I do with this? I could do a circle by just spinning the brush in place. Sorry, that's hard to see. My hand gets in the way because I have to hold the brush almost straight up and down. Do you see how I'm turning it? So that gives you an idea of some of the strokes. Oh, I can also do a line this way. And you want to kind of play around also with what happens when, I've got a paper towel here, what happens if I get all the moisture out of my brush? So a very dry brush and just a little bit of pigment. You get these kind of dry, scratchy marks that would make really nice grass if I did it this way. Or then I can get a lot of water on and really sop up a lot of pigment. Show you how that works. So this exercise is just to sort of familiarize you with your brushes. Do you see how the paint just flows when I have a lot of water and a lot of pigment? It kind of just goes where it wants to. It's always going to stay where the water is, and we've talked about that in some previous videos. And so the longer and the denser the bristles, the more pigment it's going to hold. And so you would want to use something like that with dense, long bristles if you were going to do really long strokes. And most of us are working in a very small space in our Bibles, and our strokes tend to be smaller. So now I'm going to move on to another one of my brushes. I'll do the angle brush now. This one works really well for doing lines because I can pull across and get a pretty clean edge with that. I can do some little marks with this. I can do some of my squiggles, a flat line. You just want to try and see, if I just use the tip, I kind of get these little, they're not perfectly round dots, they're almost look a little bit tulip shaped as well. So just familiarize yourself with the brush and the shapes you can make with it. Let's see what this one stamps. Need a little more paint. Oop. Got a little too much water on there. So when you have a lot of water on your brush, you don't have as much control of where the paint is going to go. But if you have very little water on your brush, then you do kind of get that dry, scratchy look. So that's something else to keep track of when you're, learning how the brush reacts and how the paint reacts differently with more water, less water, the shape of your brush, how much you load it. Those are the reasons why I really recommend you do something like this, where you just play around with your paint and play around with your brushes, and you're not trying to make anything specific. You're just learning how it feels. Last, I'm going to use my round brush, and if you've watched any of my previous videos about brush markers and round brush paint brushes and brush lettering, you know that I'm very particular about taking care of the tip of this brush and making sure I don't smash it or mistreat it when I'm washing it and drying it, so that it maintains its shape. And I will, after I wash them, I will often take my fingers and just pull it back into a point to let it dry. So let's make some marks with this. This one's a fun one to stamp little leaves. That sharp point is what gives us a softer upstroke and a heavier downstroke. Try a little bit darker color. Again, I use this brush kind of on an angle. I can do dots with the tip of this. I can do little hash marks. And of course, I can get a good line if I pull straight across. I heard that pulling down and towards you is supposed to be the best way to make a straight line, but I actually feel like my arm gets in the way dragging on the table. So I actually prefer to turn my paper. Even if I wanted to do a vertical line, I would turn my paper and I would do it horizontally, because I feel like I can pivot on my elbow and just not drag my hand. I have my hand up off the table, and so just the brushes touching, and so I feel like I get a straighter line going left to right horizontal. So anyway, that gives you a little idea of just how you can play around with your brushes. Make yourself a little mark template like this, and write on there which brushes you did, large flat brush, a angle brush, and a round tip brush. And I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's called a round tip because because when you look straight down at it, it's perfectly round, but it is tapered on the end. This is a pretty basic set. This one is made by Royal and Langnickel, and I like them because they have these nice cushy finger holds. They're also, I believe, a sable brush, although synthetic brushes are great and wash up really nicely. And so you don't have to start with expensive brushes just for trying out. And I would just go ahead and write on here which brushes you used, and there are fan brushes and smaller brushes and larger brushes. You just start with the basics, and then if you want to expand to some others to try them out later, then feel free to do so.